Every Christian knows the story. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness, fasting, being tempted by Satan, emerging spiritually stronger. Churches teach this as a test of faith through denying the flesh. They're wrong. Jesus wasn't fasting to prove devotion. He was undergoing intensive monad training, 40 days of specific practices designed to fully merge human consciousness with source consciousness, to transform from biological human into monad operating through biological form. In the Apocalypse of Peter, there's a passage describing what Jesus actually did. Not passive fasting, active training. The text says, "He withdrew not to deny the body but to transcend it. He practiced not to resist temptation but to dissolve the self that could be tempted. He spent 40 days systematically dismantling every layer of archonic programming until nothing remained but pure monad consciousness." This isn't metaphor. This isn't poetry. This is a technical manual that got buried because it makes spirituality accessible to anyone willing to do the work. The institutional church needed mystery and gatekeepers. The Apocalypse of Peter offered method and autonomy. If you've ever attempted extended fasting or meditation retreats and felt like you were touching something beyond just physical discipline, you weren't imagining it. There is a protocol. There is a specific sequence. And when you understand what Jesus actually did, you realize this wasn't about resisting Satan. This was about becoming ungovernable. The archons, whether you understand them as psychological complexes, societal conditioning, or actual non-physical entities, maintain control through a layered system of identification. You identify with your body's needs. You identify with your mind's narratives. You identify with your emotional reactions. You identify with being a separate individual with a personal story. Each layer of identification is a lever of control, and the 40-day training systematically removes every single lever. Place your hand on your solar plexus right now. That's where the training begins. In your gut, the energetic center where ego identity anchors, where survival programming operates. And the first stage of monad training is dismantling that false identity completely. Over the next 2 hours, you're going to learn the actual structure of the 40-day protocol that Jesus used, not the sanitized Sunday school version, the technical training sequence preserved in suppressed texts. You're going to understand the 4 10-day cycles, what each cycle targets, and the specific practices used in each stage. You're going to get a modern adaptation that doesn't require abandoning your life and wandering into the desert. You're going to learn why this works from both mystical and neurological perspectives, and you're going to walk away with a 40-day roadmap you can start implementing immediately, with measurable checkpoints so you can verify your own progress. This isn't about belief. This is about practice. This isn't about faith. This is about technique. The Apocalypse of Peter isn't a widely known text, and there's a reason for that. It was composed somewhere between 135 and 150 CE, making it roughly contemporaneous with the canonical Gospels, yet it never made it into the official biblical canon. The text survives in 2 main versions, a Greek fragment discovered in 1886-87 in Akhmim, Egypt, and a fuller Ethiopic translation. But there's another layer to this text that most scholars don't discuss publicly. Within certain Gnostic communities, there existed an extended commentary on the Apocalypse of Peter, passed down through initiatory chains, that detailed practical applications of the visions described in the text. This commentary tradition treated the apocalyptic imagery not as future prophecy, but as maps of consciousness transformation. The 40-day wilderness training appears in these commentary layers, describing what the text calls the 4-fold purification that precedes divine vision. The historical context matters. Early Christianity wasn't the monolithic institution we know today. It was a collection of wildly different communities with radically different interpretations of who Jesus was and what his teachings meant. You had the proto-Orthodox communities that would eventually become the Catholic Church. You had Gnostic communities in Egypt and Syria. You had Jewish Christian communities. You had Marcionite communities. And they were in fierce competition, not just theologically but practically. Each group claimed to have the true teachings, the real method, the authentic practice. The proto-Orthodox won largely because they had better organisational structure and eventually imperial backing. But they didn't win because they had better techniques. In fact, many scholars of early Christianity acknowledged that the Gnostic and mystical communities often had more sophisticated contemplative practices than the communities that became mainstream Christianity. The suppression of texts like the extended Apocalypse of Peter commentary wasn't primarily theological, it was practical. If you could read a manual and undergo transformation yourself, you didn't need a priest. You didn't need sacraments controlled by an institution. You didn't need the church at all. The 40-day training protocol was dangerous precisely because it worked. People could verify it themselves, and that made it incompatible with institutional control. Bishop Irenaeus of Lyon, writing around 180 CE, specifically condemned what he called those who claimed secret knowledge of the Saviour's practices and presumed to undergo the same transformations. He wasn't condemning them because they were wrong. He was condemning them because they were bypassing the authority structure. When the Apocalypse commentary describes the 40 days, it does so with technical precision. The Saviour withdrew to the wilderness after his baptism, and there he underwent the fourfold dissolution: 10 days to release the flesh mind, 10 days to release the thought mind, 10 days to release the feeling mind, 10 days to release the eye mind. And on the 41st day, what walked from the wilderness was not a man who had conquered temptation, but consciousness itself having mastered the vehicle of flesh. The language is specific: dissolution, not denial; release, not resistance; mastery of the vehicle, not destruction of it. This is technical vocabulary describing a technical process. Understanding what monad consciousness actually means is essential before we go further. The term monad comes from Greek philosophy, particularly Pythagoreanism and Neoplatonism, where it referred to the ultimate singular source from which all existence emanates. In Gnostic Christianity, the monad is the unknowable God beyond all dualities, beyond all creation, beyond even the concept of being or non-being. It's pure consciousness without content, pure awareness without object, the source that contains all possibilities but isn't limited to any particular manifestation. When Gnostic texts talk about returning to the monad or monad consciousness, they're describing a state where individual awareness recognizes itself as identical with this source awareness. Not metaphorically identical, not symbolically one with God. Actually functionally, experientially identical. This sounds abstract, but the practice makes it concrete. Human consciousness normally operates through layers of identification. You wake up in the morning, and immediately there's the sense of being you. Being the person with your name, your history, your personality, your problems, your goals. This sense of being a particular someone is so automatic, so constant, that we don't recognize it as an activity of consciousness. We think it's just what we are. But it's actually something consciousness is doing. It's identifying with particular contents, this body, these thoughts, these emotions, this story, and treating those contents as self. The monad training systematically interrupts that identification process, not by fighting it, not by trying to be someone different, but by training consciousness to recognize what it's doing and rest in pure awareness before it contracts into being someone. The structure of the 40 days reflects a deep understanding of how consciousness creates and maintains identity. The sequence isn't arbitrary. It moves from gross to subtle, from obvious to hidden, from easily observable to deeply embedded. You can't dissolve identity-level programming while you're still fully identified with bodily sensations. You have to first establish the capacity to witness the body as observed phenomenon. Then you can work with a more subtle layer of thoughts, then emotions, then the identity structure itself. Each layer depends on the previous layer being sufficiently loosened. This is why Jesus' training was 40 days and not 4 days. The dissolution requires time, repetition, and progressive deepening. Let's get into the actual practices of the first 10-day cycle, the body transcendence phase. The Apocalypse commentary describes Jesus beginning by sitting in one position from sunrise to sunset without moving, not meditating in the sense of concentrating on something, not visualizing, not repeating mantras, simply sitting and bringing continuous attention to every bodily sensation that arose. Hunger would arise. The practice was to feel it completely, noting its location, its quality, its intensity, its changes, without responding to it as demand. The body says, "I need food." The practice is to recognize that the body is experiencing a need, but I, awareness, am not the body. Therefore, I am not needing. This distinction sounds simple, but actually experiencing it is profound. The commentary provides specific instructions. When hunger arises, bring attention to the solar plexus where the sensation concentrates. Feel the emptiness, the contraction, the urgency. Notice how the body generates the sensation. Notice how the mind adds the story. I'm hungry. I need to eat. This is uncomfortable. How long can I endure this? The training is to separate the pure sensation from the mental narrative. The sensation is real. The sensation is happening in the body, but you are the awareness perceiving the sensation, not the sensation itself. Rest as the awareness. Let the body have its sensation. Let the mind have its story. You remain as the witnessing space in which both occur. This isn't starvation asceticism. Jesus reportedly ate enough to maintain function. The point wasn't to damage the body through extreme fasting. The point was to interrupt the automatic identification with bodily needs. In normal consciousness, hunger arises and there's instant identification. I am hungry. The sensation and the sense of self collapse into each other. The training creates space between the sensation and the self. The sensation occurs, the self observes, and in that space, something extraordinary happens. You begin to experientially recognize that you are not the body, not intellectually, not as a belief, but as direct perception. The body is an object appearing in your awareness, just like a sound or a sight is an object appearing in your awareness. This recognition is the dissolution of the first layer of archonic control. The Apocalypse commentary describes the progression through the first 10 days. Days 1 through 3, the practice is simply establishing continuous awareness of bodily sensations. Every itch, every ache, every temperature change, every urge. Just feeling them without responding. Days 4 through 6, the practice intensifies. Jesus reportedly would hold his breath until the body's panic response activated, the desperate urge to breathe, and would observe that panic as sensation without responding to it as command. The body screams, "Breathe now or die." The awareness observes the scream, and then when the observation is stable, the breathing happens, but it's no longer I am breathing, it's the body is breathing and I am witnessing. Days 7 through 10, the practice extends to deliberately triggering every bodily discomfort and witnessing each one. Sitting in heat until the body demands relief, sitting in cold until the body demands warmth, creating thirst, hunger, physical discomfort of every kind, and in each case practicing the same recognition. The body experiences this, I witness the body experiencing this, I am not the body. By day 10, the commentary describes a fundamental shift in Jesus' consciousness. The Saviour looked at his hands and recognized them as hands, not as his hands. He felt his heartbeat and recognized it as a heartbeat, not as his heartbeat. The possessive had dissolved. The body was still here, still functioning, but it was recognized as vehicle rather than self. And with that recognition, the fear of bodily harm dissolved. How can you fear damage to something you recognize is not you? How can you be controlled by threats to something you recognize is temporary housing for consciousness? This is what the church misunderstood as the temptation story. Turn these stones to bread. The archonic programming says, you are a body. Bodies need food. Therefore you must respond to hunger. Jesus' training had dissolved the first premise. He wasn't a body. He was awareness witnessing a body. The body might need food, but he, as awareness, didn't need anything. The temptation wasn't external. It was the residual programming trying to reassert identification with bodily needs. And because the first 10 days had thoroughly trained the witness consciousness, the programming found nothing to attach to. The modern application of this first cycle doesn't require the extreme approach Jesus used. You're not trying to hold your breath until you panic. You're not trying to sit in the desert heat for hours, but the principle remains identical. You practice witnessing bodily sensations without identifying with them as yours. Start with something simple. Sit comfortably and bring attention to your breath, not controlling it, not changing it, just feeling it. Notice the sensation of air moving through your nostrils. Notice your chest or belly rising and falling. Notice the pause between breaths. And here's the key. Instead of thinking, I am breathing, practice recognizing breathing is happening and I am aware of breathing happening. Feel the difference. In the first version, you are the doer. In the second version, you are the witness. The breathing is something you're aware of, not something you are. Practice this for 10 minutes daily for the first 3 days, just breath witnessing. On days 4 through 6, expand to other sensations. Sit and feel your hands. Really feel them. The tingling, the warmth, the pressure against your lap or the chair. Feel how you normally think, these are my hands. Then practice recognizing these are hands that awareness is perceiving. The possessive dissolves. On days 7 through 10, work with discomfort. Sit in a position that becomes uncomfortable after a few minutes. Feel the discomfort arise. Feel how the mind says, I'm uncomfortable, I need to move. Practice recognizing discomfort is arising in the body, and I am aware of discomfort arising in the body. Stay with it, not forcing yourself to endure, not making it painful. Just practicing the witness position until the distinction becomes clear, then move. But notice that moving happens from choice, not from compulsion. This is already different from what you've been taught meditation is. Most meditation instruction focuses on concentration or relaxation, or mindfulness in a general sense. This is specifically training the capacity to witness bodily phenomena without identifying with them as self. The goal isn't to feel peaceful, though that might happen. The goal isn't to achieve a particular state, though states will arise and pass. The goal is to establish experientially that you are not the body. The body is what you're aware of. You are the awareness. And once that distinction becomes stable through practice, the first layer of programming, control through bodily needs and fears, loses its power. The second 10-day cycle targets mental activity, and this is where the training gets more challenging because thought is more subtle than sensation. The Apocalypse commentary describes Jesus' practice during days 11 through 20 as the observation of the thought stream without entering the thought stream. In normal consciousness, thoughts appear and we immediately become them. A thought arises. What will I do tomorrow? And instantly there's identification. You are now the one planning tomorrow. Your consciousness has entered the thought and is operating from within it, generating more thoughts, creating scenarios, problem solving, worrying. The whole process happens so fast and so automatically that we don't notice it happening. We just find ourselves thinking, and we assume thinking is what we are. The training interrupts this. Jesus reportedly sat facing a blank rock wall for hours, bringing continuous attention to the space just before thoughts arose, not trying to stop thoughts, not trying to control mental activity, simply watching the space where thoughts emerge. The commentary describes it. A thought appears like a bubble rising from water. Before it appears, there is stillness. It emerges, it expands, it pops, and there is stillness again. Untrained consciousness rides the bubble, believes itself to be the bubble, lives in the bubble world. Trained consciousness remains as the water from which bubbles emerge and into which they dissolve. The specific practice instructions are detailed. Watch for the thought's arrival. The instant before a thought forms, there is a subtle movement in awareness, like a tremor before an earthquake. Train yourself to catch that tremor. In that moment, you witness thought arising rather than becoming thought. The thought completes its formation. Words appear in the mind, images appear. The thought has its content, and here is the test. Can you remain as the awareness perceiving the thought, or do you become the thinker of the thought? If you remain as awareness, the thought arises, plays out, and dissolves, all while you observe. If you become the thinker, you've been captured by the thought, and you won't notice you've been captured until minutes later when another moment of awareness arises, and you realize you've been lost in thinking. Days 11 through 13 of Jesus' training focused on simply recognizing when he'd been captured by thoughts and returning to the witness position. The commentary notes he would sit for hours, and hundreds of times per hour he would notice he'd been lost in thinking, and hundreds of times he would return to witnessing. No judgment, no frustration, just the simple recognition. I was identified with thought, now I am aware again. Days 14 through 16, the practice shifted to categorizing thoughts. Every thought that arose was noted by type: planning thought, memory thought, judgment thought, fantasy thought, fear thought, desire thought. The categorization itself isn't the goal. The goal is maintaining the witness position long enough to categorize, which means you're not inside the thought, you're observing the thought from outside. Days 17 through 20. The commentary describes an intensive practice where Jesus deliberately triggered thought storms and observed them. He would recall difficult memories, knowing they would generate cascades of associative thinking. He would imagine future threats, knowing the mind would generate planning and worry sequences, and in each case he would watch the storm without entering it. Thoughts upon thoughts arising, each one trying to capture awareness, and awareness remaining as the space in which the storm occurred. By the 20th day, the commentary states, the Saviour's relationship to thinking had fundamentally transformed. Thoughts still arose. The mind still generated its constant activity, but there was no one thinking the thoughts. There was only awareness, and thoughts appearing in awareness, and no confusion between the two. This is what the second temptation represents. Throw yourself from the temple and God will save you. The archonic programming says, you are your thoughts. Your thoughts tell you who you are and what to do. Therefore you must believe and obey your thoughts. The training had dissolved this. Jesus recognized thoughts as movements in awareness, not as truth, not as self, not as commands to be obeyed. The thought, throw yourself down, could arise in the mind, but he wasn't the thought. He was the awareness in which the thought appeared. The thought had no power over him because he wasn't identified with thinking as self. The modern application begins with simple thought watching. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, and watch for the next thought to arise. Don't try to think, don't try not to think. Try. Just watch the mental space and wait for a thought to appear. When it appears, notice it. There's a thought. You might think I need to check my email. The practice is to recognize there is a thought about checking email, rather than I need to check email. Feel the difference. In one, you are the thought. In the other, you are aware of the thought. Practice this for 10 minutes daily for days 11 through 13. You'll notice you get captured by thoughts constantly. You'll be watching for thoughts, a thought will appear, and 30 seconds later you'll realize you've been thinking about what the thought was about, rather than observing the thought. This is normal. This is the pattern you're training to interrupt. Every time you notice you've been captured, you return to watching. Every return strengthens the witness. Days 14 through 16, practice categorizing. Sit and observe your thoughts for 15 minutes. Every time a thought arises, mentally note its category. Planning, memory, judgment, worry. Don't analyze, don't elaborate. Just note the category and return to watching. This practice does something subtle. It maintains the observer position because you can't categorize something you're inside of. You have to be outside it, looking at it, to identify what kind of thing it is. By repeatedly categorizing, you're repeatedly reinforcing the distinction between awareness and mental content. Days 17 through 20, work with thought storms. Pick a topic that generates a lot of thinking. Maybe a problem at work, maybe a relationship difficulty, maybe a financial concern. Bring the topic to mind and watch what happens. The mind will generate dozens of thoughts in quick succession, scenarios, analyses, worries, plans. Let it happen. Your practice is to remain as the awareness watching the storm, not getting involved, not trying to solve anything, not believing the thoughts, just watching the mental weather. You'll get sucked in repeatedly. You'll find yourself 10 thoughts deep into problem solving. Before you remember, you're supposed to be watching. Every time you remember, you return. And each return is a moment of disidentification, a moment of recognizing you are not the thinking, you're aware of the thinking. What happens over these 10 days is remarkable. Thoughts don't stop, the mind doesn't become quiet, but your relationship to thinking changes. Thoughts become less compelling. They lose their authority. A worry thought can arise and you recognize it as just a thought, just a pattern of mental energy, not a truth about reality you must respond to. A self-critical thought can arise and you recognize it as mental content, not an accurate assessment of your worth. This doesn't mean you ignore all thinking. It means you're no longer controlled by thinking. You can observe thoughts, assess whether they're useful, choose whether to engage with them or let them pass. The choosing happens from awareness, not from within the thought stream. The third 10-day cycle addresses emotional programming, and this is where the training reaches its most difficult phase because emotions feel intensely personal and powerfully real. The Apocalypse commentary describes Jesus' practice during days 21 through 30 as the descent into the feeling realm and the emergence from it unchanged. Unlike sensations and thoughts, which can be observed with some relative ease once you've established the witness position, emotions seem to be what you are. Fear doesn't just appear in awareness. Fear seems to be the awareness itself contracting. Anger doesn't just arise as content. Anger seems to be you becoming the anger. The identification is more complete, more convincing, more overwhelming. The commentary describes Jesus' method. He did not avoid emotions. He did not suppress them. He deliberately evoked every emotion and entered it fully while maintaining witness consciousness. This is the paradox of the training. You must feel the emotion completely, giving it total permission to be as intense as it wants to be, while simultaneously maintaining the recognition that you are the awareness in which the emotion is arising, not the emotion itself. This requires a capacity developed in the previous 20 days. If you can't witness sensations, you can't witness emotions, because emotions always have a strong somatic component. If you can't witness thoughts, you can't witness emotions, because emotions always come with associated narratives. Days 21 through 23 focused on fear. The commentary describes Jesus deliberately recalling every frightening experience of his life, every trauma, every threat, and allowing the fear response to fully activate in his body. The accelerated heartbeat, the shallow breathing, the tension, the adrenaline, the mental scenarios of danger, all of it permitted to arise and be as intense as it became, and through it all the practice. This is fear arising, this is fear being felt. I am the awareness in which fear is arising. Not I am afraid, fear is present. The distinction sounds minor, the experiential difference is total. The trap with emotions is that they seem to prove their own reality. When you're afraid, the fear says, there is danger, I'm afraid because there is danger, this fear is appropriate and necessary. The emotion comes with its own justification built in. The witness training isn't about evaluating whether the fear is justified. It's about recognizing that whether justified or not, fear is an energetic pattern arising in awareness, not the awareness itself. You can be aware of fear without being afraid. This sounds impossible until you experience it, and then it's obvious. Days 24 through 26 focused on anger and rage. The commentary notes Jesus would recall every betrayal, every injustice, every humiliation, allowing the anger to build until his body shook with it. And in the midst of the rage, the practice. This is anger arising. This is anger being felt. I am the awareness in which anger is arising. The anger wants to be you. It wants you to become the anger, to act from the anger, to let the anger possess consciousness completely. The training is to let anger be as intense as it wants, while maintaining the position of awareness. The anger is real, the anger is happening, but I am not the anger. I am aware of the anger. Days 27 through 29 address desire and grief, the attachments and losses that create the sense of personal stake in existence. Desire says, I need this to be happy. Grief says, I have lost what I needed. Both emotions create the sense that you are someone with needs, someone who can be fulfilled or devastated by what happens. The training was to fully feel the desire without acting on it, fully feel the grief without being consumed by it, and in both cases maintain the recognition. These are emotions arising in awareness, not the awareness itself. The commentary describes day 30 as a synthesis. Having practiced with each emotion individually, the Saviour on the 30th day opened himself to feeling everything simultaneously. Every fear, every anger, every desire, every grief, every joy, every love, every hate. The entire emotional spectrum activated at once. His body became a storm of feeling, and in the centre of the storm, untouched, unchanged, he remained as pure awareness. The emotions were weather in the sky of consciousness, powerful weather, real weather, but he was the sky, not the weather. This is what the Church describes as the devil offering all the kingdoms of the world. The archonic programming says, you are your emotions. Your emotions tell you what you need and fear and want. Therefore you must obey your emotions. The training had revealed this as false. Emotions arise, emotions are felt. But consciousness is not identical with emotional content. You are the space in which emotions occur, and from that space you can feel everything without being controlled by anything. The modern approach to this cycle requires care because deliberately triggering intense emotions can be destabilizing if you haven't built the witness foundation. Days 21 through 23 start with mild fear, not terror, maybe anxiety. Bring to mind something that makes you anxious. Feel where the anxiety manifests in your body, usually the chest or stomach. Feel the sensations fully. Feel the mental component, the worried thoughts, and practice the recognition. Anxiety is present. I am aware of anxiety being present. Stay with it for 10 minutes. Don't try to make it go away. Don't try to talk yourself out of it, just witness it. Notice that you can feel anxiety without being anxious. The anxiety is content in consciousness. You are the consciousness. Days 24 through 26 work with anger or frustration. Recall something that irritated or angered you. Let the feeling arise. Feel the heat, the tension, the reactive thoughts, and practice. Anger is present. I'm aware of anger being present. The anger will try to pull you into its narrative. This happened and it was wrong and they shouldn't have done that, and I should respond by, just notice the narrative as part of the anger pattern. Feel the anger in your body, observe the thoughts the anger generates, and maintain the witness position. You are not the anger, you're aware of the anger. Days 27 through 29 work with longing and loss. Think about something you want and don't have, or something you had and lost. Feel the desire or the grief. These emotions can be surprisingly powerful. The ache of wanting, the emptiness of loss. Let them be as strong as they are. And practice. Desire is present. I am aware of desire being present. Grief is present. I'm aware of grief being present. The emotions will say, but this means something about me, about my life, about what I need. Notice that this meaning-making is part of the emotional pattern. The emotion generates thoughts that justify the emotion. Feel the whole pattern without believing it. Day 30, sit with whatever emotions are present in this moment. Don't try to generate anything, just notice what you're feeling right now. There might be subtle anxiety about the future, subtle satisfaction about something recent, subtle frustration about something pending. Whatever is there, feel it, name it, witness it. Practice recognizing that every emotion, no matter how subtle or how intense, is content arising in the space of your awareness, not the awareness itself. What shifts over these 10 days is your relationship to emotional intensity. Emotions don't decrease. You don't become some detached, emotionless robot. But emotions lose their controlling power. Fear can be present without dictating your behavior. Anger can be present without possessing you. Desire can be present without running your life. Grief can be present without destroying you. You become capable of feeling everything without being controlled by anything, because you've established experientially that you are not your emotions. Your emotions are something you're aware of. You are the awareness. The fourth 10-day cycle is the deepest and most subtle because it addresses the root of all identification, the sense of being a particular person. Days 31 through 40 of Jesus' training focused on what the commentary calls the dissolution of the I thought. Even after recognizing you're not the body, not the thoughts, not the emotions, there's still the sense of being someone, being the person named Jesus, the person with a history, a family, a role, a destiny. This sense of personal identity is the deepest archonic programming because it seems self-evident. Of course I'm me, of course I'm someone, what else would I be? The monad teaching answers, you are pure awareness, temporarily experiencing itself through the lens of an individual perspective, but not limited to or defined by that individual perspective. The person you think you are is a construct, a useful construct, a necessary construct for functioning in the world, but a construct nonetheless. Consciousness has associated itself with a particular body-mind, has identified with a particular history and personality, and has created the sense, this is me. But this is something consciousness is doing, not what consciousness is. The commentary describes Jesus' practice as resting in the I am without the I am this. Every time the thought arose, I am Jesus, or I am the carpenter's son, or I am the one who... The practice was to notice the identification and release it, returning to pure I am without content. Just the bare sense of existing, of being aware, without any qualification of who or what is existing or being aware. This practice is extremely difficult to describe because language itself is structured around subject-object duality. I am something. I am doing something. The practice is to find the I before it becomes anything, before it does anything. Just the sense of existing, of being conscious, of awareness being aware of itself. Days 31 through 33 focused on witnessing the construction of identity. Jesus reportedly would watch his mind automatically adding identity to experiences. A thought would arise, I am hungry. The practice was to notice how I and hungry got linked. The body has hunger. Awareness is aware of the body having hunger. But somewhere in that process, consciousness claims the hunger as its own. I am hungry. The training was to catch that claiming happening, not to prevent it, not to fight it, just to see it occurring. There is hunger becoming I am hungry, and in seeing the construction loosens. Days 34 through 36 focused on the historical identity. Every memory is a story about me. This happened to me. I did this. I experienced that. The practice was to recall memories without the personal pronoun. Not, I was born in Nazareth, but birth happened in Nazareth. Not, I learned carpentry from my father, but carpentry was learned. This feels absurd at first. It feels like you're denying your own experience. But the practice isn't about denial. It's about recognizing that experiences happen, and consciousness is aware of experiences happening, and the me is added by consciousness, not inherent to the experiences themselves. Days 37 through 39 focused on the future identity. Every plan is a story about me in the future. I will do this. I will become that. I need to accomplish this. The practice was to observe all future-oriented thoughts and notice how they all depend on the assumption of a continuous me extending through time. There's the me now, and there's the me tomorrow, and there's the me next year, and they're all assumed to be the same entity. The practice was to question this. What if there's just consciousness now, and whatever consciousness arises tomorrow will be consciousness tomorrow, and the connection between them is a story, not an entity? Not to believe this philosophically, but to hold the question experientially while watching the mind generate its future me scenarios. Day 40 is described as the culmination. The Saviour sat from dawn until the stars emerged and practiced resting as pure awareness without any content. No attention to the body, no attention to thoughts, no attention to emotions, no attention to being anyone, just awareness being aware of awareness. I am, nothing more. And in that naked presence, the final layer dissolved. There was no Jesus. There was consciousness experiencing itself through the Jesus vehicle, but the consciousness was not limited to, defined by, or ultimately identified with the Jesus vehicle. The merger was complete. The monad operated through the form. The commentary describes what emerged on day 41 with stark clarity. The body that walked from the wilderness looked like the body that had entered, but what operated the body had fundamentally changed. Before the training, consciousness believed itself to be Jesus, a human trying to connect with the divine. After the training, consciousness recognized itself as the divine experiencing itself through the Jesus vehicle. The vehicle could still use the name Jesus. The vehicle could still function in human society, but there was no confusion about what was real and what was functional. The person was functional. Consciousness was real. This is what made Jesus ungovernable. You can't control someone who doesn't identify as a separate individual. You can threaten the body. They recognize the body as temporary vehicle. You can manipulate with thoughts. They recognize thoughts as content, not truth. You can leverage emotions. They recognize emotions as energy patterns, not facts about reality. You can appeal to their self-interest. They recognize the self as construct, not as entity with interest to protect. Every lever of control depends on identification. Remove the identification, and the levers grab at nothing. The modern application of this final cycle is subtle and requires that the previous 30 days have been genuinely practiced. Days 31 through 33 practice catching identity thoughts. Sit quietly and watch for any thought that includes I or me or my. My back hurts. I need to call him. I'm worried about this. Every time one arises, notice it. Don't change it. Just notice how consciousness is claiming ownership of experiences, thoughts, or feelings. Notice the claiming itself as an activity of consciousness. Days 34 through 36. Work with memory without personal pronouns. Recall a memory from childhood, maybe learning to ride a bike. Instead of "I learned to ride a bike when I was 7, practice describing it as bike riding was learned at age 7. Instead of "I fell and scraped my knee, practice falling happened, knee was scraped." This feels grammatically weird and emotionally strange. That strangeness is important. It's revealing how deeply the personal pronoun is embedded in your sense of experience. You're not denying the experience happened, you're loosening the identification with being the one to whom it happened. Days 37 through 39 notice future-oriented thoughts and the me assumption within them. I need to finish this project. Notice how that thought assumes a continuous you extending into the future. I'm going to be so happy when... Notice the assumption of a future you who will experience happiness. Not trying to change the thoughts, just noticing the structure. The me now imagining a me later and treating them as the same entity. What if there's just awareness now, and the future me as a story awareness now is telling itself? Day 40. Practice resting as pure awareness. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Instead of being aware of something, your breath, your body, sounds, thoughts, practice being aware of awareness itself. This is subtle. You're not looking for an object called awareness. You're recognizing yourself as awareness and resting in that recognition. The way to do this: ask yourself, am I aware right now? The answer is obviously yes. That knowing that you're aware, that's awareness being aware of itself. Rest there. When attention gets captured by content, a sound, a thought, a sensation, notice that awareness is still present, still aware, regardless of what it's aware of. Return to resting as the awareness itself, not as any particular content awareness is aware of. This final practice is what's sometimes called self-inquiry, or awareness aware of itself, or resting in pure presence. It's not complicated, but it's unfamiliar, and the mind will resist it because the mind operates through content, and this practice is recognizing what's aware of content. You'll drift into thought constantly. You'll find yourself being aware of something rather than resting as awareness. Every time you notice, you return. The returning is the practice. Over time, the capacity to rest as awareness stabilizes, and as it stabilizes, the sense of being a particular person softens, not disappearing, but being recognized as something consciousness is doing, not what consciousness is. By the end of 40 days of genuine practice, not reading about the practice, not understanding the theory, but actually doing the practices daily, your relationship to your sense of self will have changed. You'll still function as a person. You'll still use your name, do your job, maintain your relationships, but there will be a recognition underneath all of it. This is consciousness operating through a person vehicle, not consciousness believing itself to be the person. And with that recognition comes freedom. Freedom from being controlled by bodily needs, mental narratives, emotional states, or the need to protect and advance a separate self. You become, as the text says, ungovernable. The neuroscience of what's happening during this training is increasingly well documented. The default mode network, a collection of brain regions active when we are engaged in self-referential thought, shows decreased activity in long-term meditators, particularly those practicing awareness-based techniques. The posterior cingulate cortex associated with the sense of self shows reduced activation. The anterior insula, involved in interoception and the sense of body ownership, shows altered patterns of connectivity. These aren't just brain changes corresponding to different mental states. These are structural changes in how the brain constructs the sense of self. Dr. Judson Brewer's research at Brown University demonstrates that experienced meditators show decreased activity in the posterior cingulate cortex, not just during meditation, but as a baseline trait. The brain is literally changing how it generates the sense of being someone. Dr. Richard Davidson's work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison shows that compassion meditation, which involves dissolving the boundary between self and other, produces lasting changes in the brain's empathy circuitry. The neural correlates of what the Apocalypse commentary calls dissolution of the I thought are measurable and consistent across contemplative traditions. From a philosophical standpoint, what the monad training accomplishes is what Advaita Vedanta calls neti-neti, not this, not this. You progressively disidentify from everything you can observe, recognizing that you cannot be what you observe. You observe the body, therefore you are not the body. You observe thoughts, therefore you are not thoughts. You observe emotions, therefore you are not emotions. You observe the sense of personal identity, therefore you are not the personal identity. What remains when everything observable has been excluded? Pure observing, pure awareness, pure consciousness, the monad. The one reality that cannot be observed because it is the observer. The one reality that cannot be known as an object because it is the subject, the knower itself. This isn't solipsism. This isn't denying external reality. This is recognizing that what you ultimately are is the awareness in which all experience arises, not any particular content of experience. And when consciousness recognizes itself this way, a fundamental shift occurs. The fear of death dissolves because you recognize yourself as the awareness that witnesses birth and death of the body, not as the body itself. The addiction to pleasure and aversion to pain softens because you recognize yourself as the awareness in which pleasant and painful sensations occur, not as the sensations themselves. The need for external validation disappears because you recognize yourself as the awareness that witnesses praise and criticism, not as the story about yourself that praise or criticism might confirm or challenge. The practical implications are profound. Someone operating from monad consciousness can't be manipulated through fear because they don't identify as the entity that could be threatened. They can't be controlled through desire because they don't identify as the entity that lacks something. They can't be managed through social approval or disapproval because they don't identify as the story society tells about them. This doesn't mean they become selfish or uncaring. Often the opposite happens. When you stop defending a separate self, natural compassion arises because the boundary between self and other has dissolved. Helping others isn't charity from a separate you to a separate them. It's consciousness recognizing itself in different forms and responding to its own suffering. This is why the teaching was suppressed. An individual operating from monad consciousness can't be controlled by conventional means. They can still choose to follow laws, maintain social contracts, participate in institutions, but the choice is conscious, not compelled. They're ungovernable not because they're rebellious, but because the self that could be governed doesn't exist as they once assumed it did. The only self present is a functional construct that consciousness uses to operate in the human world, not an entity that consciousness believes itself to be. The practical roadmap for a modern 40-day practice requires adapting the intensive wilderness training to contemporary life. You're not abandoning your responsibilities, not quitting your job, not isolating in a cave. You're maintaining your normal life while implementing a daily practice that progressively deepens. Here's the structure that maintains the essential sequence while fitting into a realistic schedule. Days 1 through 10, body witness training. Every morning before checking your phone or eating breakfast, sit for 20 minutes and practice body sensation witnessing. Use the approach described earlier. Bring attention to breath. Recognize breathing is happening and you are aware of it happening. Expand to other sensations. Throughout the day, practice micro moments of body witnessing. When you feel hunger, pause for 10 seconds and recognize. Hunger is present in the body. I'm aware of hunger being present in the body. When you feel fatigue, tension, comfort, whatever sensation arises, practice the same distinction. The body is experiencing this. I am witnessing the body experiencing this. By day 10, the distinction should be clearly experiential, not just conceptual. Days 11 through 20, mental witness training. Continue the morning 20-minute body practice, but add 15 minutes of thought watching. Sit after your body practice and watch thoughts arise. Categorize them as they appear: planning, memory, judgment, worry, fantasy. Throughout the day, practice catching yourself lost in thought. You'll be in the middle of an internal conversation or planning session, and you'll suddenly remember, I'm lost in thinking. That moment of remembering is the moment of witness consciousness activating. Don't judge yourself for getting lost. Just notice it and return to presence. Every noticing, every returning strengthens the witness. By day 20, you should be able to maintain the observer position for several minutes without getting captured by thought content. Days 21 through 30, emotional witness training. Continue the morning 20-minute body practice and 15-minute thought practice, adding 10 minutes of emotion work. Deliberately bring to mind something that triggers a mild emotion: anxiety, irritation, longing, and practice witnessing the emotion as described earlier. Throughout the day, when emotions arise naturally, practice the same witnessing. Fear appears in a meeting. Pause internally for a moment. Fear is present. I am aware of fear being present. Frustration arises in traffic. Notice it. Frustration is present. I am aware of frustration being present. You're not suppressing the emotions. You're not acting them out inappropriately. You're feeling them fully while maintaining the witness position. By day 30, even intense emotions should be recognizable as content in consciousness, rather than as what consciousness is. Days 31 through 40, identity witness training. Continue the morning practices, now totaling 45 minutes, 20 minutes body, 15 minutes thought, 10 minutes emotion, and add the final component, 15 minutes of resting as awareness. Use the self-inquiry approach described earlier. Ask, am I aware right now? And rest in the recognition of awareness itself. Throughout the day, practice noticing identity thoughts and the me assumption in your planning and memory. The practices from days 34 through 39 become your daily awareness. By day 40, there should be a clear experiential recognition. I am not this body-mind. I am the awareness in which this body-mind appears. The person continues to function. But the identification with being the person has loosened fundamentally. This modern 40-day protocol requires approximately 1 hour of formal practice daily, progressively building from 20 minutes to 1 hour as you move through the cycles. That's realistic for most people. It's significant enough to create actual transformation, but not so demanding that it's impossible to maintain. The key is consistency. Missing a day breaks the progressive deepening. If you miss a day, start that 10-day cycle over. The sequence matters. Each cycle builds on the previous one. After completing the 40 days, what happens? The commentary describes Jesus continuing to practice. but the practice had become his baseline consciousness. He didn't have to try to witness the body. Witness consciousness was simply how he related to the body naturally. He didn't have to remember to not identify with thoughts. Non-identification was his default. The training had created new neural pathways, new habits of consciousness, a new baseline of awareness. This becomes true for modern practitioners as well. The 40 days aren't about achieving a permanent state of enlightenment. They're about establishing a new baseline of awareness that you then continue to deepen through ongoing practice. The most common obstacles people encounter in this training can be anticipated and addressed. First obstacle: the belief that witnessing requires some special state. People think witness consciousness should feel mystical or blissful or dramatically different. It doesn't. Witness consciousness just means being aware that you're aware, and recognizing what you're aware of is not what you are. This can feel completely ordinary, almost disappointingly normal. That's fine. The transformation isn't in feeling special, it's in the progressive loosening of identification. Second obstacle: the mind's resistance to relinquishing control. Your thinking process will generate arguments for why this practice is unnecessary, dangerous, pointless, or impossible. This is just dissociation. This is spiritual bypassing. This is denying my humanity. These are thoughts. Notice them as thoughts. The mind's job is to maintain the current structure of consciousness, which means resisting anything that threatens the structure. Expect resistance. Don't fight it. Witness it. Third obstacle: emotional intensity increasing before it decreases. When you start paying close attention to emotions without suppressing them or acting them out, they can feel more intense initially. This is temporary. You're feeling emotions more fully than you usually allow yourself to feel them. The intensity passes. What remains is the capacity to feel anything without being overwhelmed. Fourth obstacle: fear of losing yourself. As identity loosens, there can be genuine fear. If I'm not this person, what am I? The fear is understandable. You're releasing the only sense of self you've ever known. But what's discovered underneath isn't nothing. It's everything. It's consciousness itself, which is what you've always been, now recognized directly rather than experienced through the filter of personal identity. The fear passes as the recognition stabilizes. Fifth obstacle: the pull back to normal identification. After days of practice, you'll have moments of clear witness consciousness, and then you'll get stressed or overwhelmed or excited, and you'll snap back into complete identification with body-mind. This is normal. The training isn't about never identifying. It's about developing the capacity to notice when you're identified and return to witness consciousness. Over time, the returns happen faster and the baseline shifts. Measuring progress is important because this isn't about faith or belief. It's about practice producing verifiable results. Day 10 checkpoint. Can you feel a bodily sensation and simultaneously recognize that the sensation is being observed by awareness? If yes, the body witness has been established at a basic level. Day 20 checkpoint. Can you watch thoughts arise and pass for at least 30 seconds without getting captured by thought content? If yes, the mental witness has been established. Day 30 checkpoint. Can you feel an emotion fully while maintaining the recognition that the emotion is content in consciousness, not the consciousness itself? If yes, the emotional witness has been established. Day 40. Checkpoint. Can you rest as awareness itself, even briefly, recognizing yourself as what's aware rather than as any content you're aware of? If yes, the witness consciousness foundation is established. These checkpoints aren't pass-fail tests, they're indicators. If you can't clearly meet a checkpoint, it means that 10-day cycle needs more practice. Extend it. Repeat it. The timeline isn't sacred. The The progression is: don't move to thought witnessing if body witnessing isn't established. Don't move to emotion witnessing if thought witnessing isn't established. Don't move to identity witnessing if emotion witnessing isn't established. Each layer of practice is the foundation for the next layer. The integration with daily life is where the training proves itself. The point isn't to be able to witness during formal practice. The point is for witness consciousness to become your natural mode of being. When someone criticizes you at work, can you feel the emotional reaction and simultaneously recognize it as content in awareness? When you're planning your schedule and feeling stressed about everything you need to do, can you notice the thought storm and recognize you're not the storm, you're aware of the storm? When you're exhausted and your body is demanding rest, can you recognize the body's needs while understanding you're not the body? This is the real measure. Not how well you can meditate in a quiet room, but how quickly witness consciousness activates in the middle of normal life. After establishing the foundation through the 40-day training, the practice continues as maintenance and deepening. A realistic ongoing practice is 30 minutes daily of formal sitting, cycling through body, thought, emotion, and awareness witnessing, plus continuous informal practice throughout the day. The informal practice is just remembering to witness. You're in a meeting. You notice you're completely identified with your role and your concerns. You take an internal step back and recognize, I am not this role. I am awareness aware of this role being performed. You're having a difficult conversation. Emotions are intense. You recognize, I am not these emotions. I am awareness in which these emotions are arising. Each remembering, each return to witness consciousness deepens the neural pathway, strengthens the habit, shifts the baseline. Advanced variations emerge naturally from consistent practice. One variation is practicing witness consciousness during peak experiences, not just during stress or difficulty, but during joy, pleasure, excitement, love. Can you feel intense happiness and simultaneously recognize that happiness is arising in awareness? Can you be deeply absorbed in a creative project and simultaneously maintain a subtle recognition that absorption is happening in consciousness? This isn't about dampening positive experiences, it's about experiencing them more fully precisely because you're not contracted around them, not trying to hold on to them, not lost in them. Another advanced variation is what some traditions call choiceless awareness, sitting without any specific object of attention, just allowing whatever arises to arise and maintaining witness consciousness with everything. Sensations arise and pass, thoughts arise and pass, emotions arise and pass, the sense of self arises and passes. You remain as the awareness in which all of it occurs. This practice can only work if the foundation is solid. Without established witness capacity, choiceless awareness just becomes spacing out or getting lost in thought. A third advanced variation is practicing witness consciousness during sleep. This sounds impossible, but it's documented across contemplative traditions. As witness consciousness becomes more stable during waking life, it can begin to persist into dream states, and even deep sleep. You dream, and there's a subtle awareness that dreaming is happening. You sleep, and there's a subtle awareness that sleeping is happening. This isn't about staying partially awake. It's about consciousness recognizing its own continuity across waking, dreaming, and deep sleep states. This is considered an indicator of very mature practice. Related practices that complement the monad training include loving kindness meditation, which helps soften the sense of separation between self and other. Inquiry-based practices like the "Who am I?" method from Ramana Maharshi, which directly investigates the nature of the self. Body-based practices like yoga or qigong, which develop sensitivity to subtle energy and help recognize the body as process rather than thing. And shadow work, which brings unconscious identifications into conscious awareness where they can be witnessed and released. The long-term trajectory of this practice isn't about reaching a destination. It's about consciousness progressively recognizing its own nature. The initial 40 days establish the witness foundation. Months of practice deepen and stabilize the witness. Years of practice result in witness consciousness becoming the default mode, with only occasional collapses into complete identification. Decades of practice produce what traditions call stable awakening, witness consciousness so thoroughly established that it persists continuously, with no more forgetting, no more getting lost in identification. The person continues to function, but consciousness never again mistakes itself for the person. This doesn't mean you become emotionless, thoughtless, or robotically detached. It means you become fully human while recognizing you're not limited to being human. You feel emotions more deeply because you're not defending against them or trying to control them. You think more clearly because you're not identified with thinking as self. You act more effectively because you're not operating from fear of protecting a separate self. You become more present, more responsive, more alive, precisely because consciousness is no longer trapped in the construction of being someone. The community aspect of this practice matters. While the training can be done individually, having others who understand the process, who have walked the path, who can confirm your experiences and help you navigate obstacles is invaluable. This is why contemplative traditions have always included sangha, community, lineage, not to create dependency or enforce orthodoxy, but because consciousness recognizing itself is supported by meeting other instances of consciousness that have also recognized themselves. Online communities, local meditation groups, teachers who have established their own witness consciousness and can guide others. These are resources worth seeking. If you want to go deeper with this after the 40 days, here are the classical texts and modern resources that provide additional context and instruction. The Upanishads, particularly the Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya Upanishads, describe the neti-neti approach and the recognition of consciousness as Brahman. The Ashtavakra Gita is a direct, uncompromising text on pure awareness and the recognition of self as consciousness. The Heart Sutra and Diamond Sutra from Buddhism present emptiness teaching, which is another angle on the same recognition. No fixed self, no fixed identity, just pure awareness and phenomena arising in awareness. From Christian mysticism, the cloud of unknowing, and the writings of Meister Eckhart describe the dissolution of self and union with the divine in language that parallels monad teaching. Modern teachers and resources include Adyashanti, who teaches in a style that blends Zen and Advaita Vedanta with accessibility for Western practitioners. Rupert Spira offers clear, precise instruction in the recognition of awareness as what we are. Sam Harris, despite his scientific skepticism about religion, provides excellent guided meditations on the recognition of no self through his Waking Up app. Shinzen Young offers detailed, systematic training in mindfulness and witness consciousness with a focus on measurable progress. These aren't gurus to worship. They're practitioners who have walked the path and can offer maps, guidance, and confirmation. The final inspiration I can offer is this. The 40-day training Jesus underwent wasn't special because he was divine. He was demonstrating what human consciousness can do. The whole point of the teaching is that anyone can undergo this transformation. You don't need to be chosen. You don't need special genetics. You don't need previous lives of karma or divine grace. You need accurate instruction and consistent practice. That's it. The monad, pure consciousness, source awareness, isn't something outside you that you're trying to reach. It's what you are, what you've always been, temporarily not recognizing itself because it's identified with being a particular someone. The 40-day training is the systematic dismantling of that identification. Body, mind, emotion, identity. Each layer of who you think you are gets recognized as content in consciousness rather than as consciousness itself, and as each layer is witnessed rather than identified with, consciousness progressively recognizes its own nature. not as concept, not as belief, as direct, experiential, undeniable recognition. I am not the body, I am awareness. I am not the thoughts, I am awareness. I am not the emotions, I am awareness. I am not the person, I am awareness. And that awareness is not separate from the monad, from source consciousness, from what some call God. It is that, you are that. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, actually. This is what makes you ungovernable, not rebellion, not defiance, but the simple recognition that the self that could be governed is a construct, and you are the consciousness in which that construct appears. Threats can't control you because you're not what can be threatened. Rewards can't manipulate you because you're not what can gain or lose. Social pressure can't shape you because you're not the social self that seeks approval. You become free. Not free to do whatever you want. Free from being unconsciously driven by identification with body, mind, emotion, and personal story. And that freedom is what the archonic system, whatever you understand that to mean, cannot tolerate. A free human, a human operating from monad consciousness, cannot be controlled, manipulated, or managed by conventional means. They can still choose to participate in society, follow laws, maintain relationships. But the choice is conscious. The participation is voluntary. The compliance is deliberate, not compulsed. And that's dangerous to any system that requires unconscious identification to function. The invitation is simple. Take the 40 days, do the practices, not as belief, not as faith, as experiment, as investigation, as empirical test, body witnessing for 10 days, mental witnessing for 10 days, emotional witnessing for 10 days, identity witnessing for 10 days. See what happens, not what you think should happen, not what some text promises will happen, what actually happens in your direct experience. And if at the end of 40 days you've genuinely practiced consistently, you will have verifiable changes. The witness foundation will be established. The baseline of consciousness will have shifted. You will experientially recognize yourself as awareness, not as content in awareness. And from that recognition, everything changes. Not overnight, not dramatically, but fundamentally. You'll still have a body, but you'll know you're not the body. You'll still have thoughts, but you'll know you're not your thoughts. You'll still have emotions, but you'll know you're not your emotions. You'll still function as a person in the world, but you'll know you're not limited to being that person. And that knowing, that direct experiential recognition of consciousness as what you are, is the awakening every tradition points toward. The enlightenment, the liberation, the gnosis, the monad consciousness that Jesus demonstrated is possible for human consciousness to embody. The 40 days wasn't fasting, it was training. The wilderness wasn't location, it was state. The temptation wasn't external, it was the residual identification trying to reassert itself. And the emergence wasn't a man who'd resisted evil, it was consciousness that had recognized itself, operating through a human vehicle, ungovernable, free, awake. That's what's possible. That's what the training produces. That's what you're invited to discover for yourself. Not through belief, but through practice. Not through faith, but through direct experience. The 40 days are yours to take. The transformation is yours to verify. The monad consciousness is yours to recognize because it's what you already are, simply not yet recognized as such.